Hey guys, Paul here. Welcome to RDTV, where today we're doing another product review. And we've got something pretty damn right spectacular. This is a direct drive wheel, and this is the SimSteering V2 from Leo Bodnar. It is a tremendous piece of equipment, and I'm going to talk to you about my experiences with this wheel, share some of my thoughts, impressions and feedback, and let you know, hopefully, everything you need to know about a direct drive wheel of the absolute highest quality. Stay tuned to find out what we think. So, very recently we were lucky enough to get our hands on the Leo Bodnar SimSteering version 2 direct drive wheel. Now, I've had a bit of experience with direct drive wheels from a range of different manufacturers, and in fact I've got another OSW direct drive wheel on my rig at the moment. So I'm in a reasonably good place to be able to make a reasonably fair judgment of how this wheel stacks up against some of the competition. What I want to do today is talk to you about the pros and cons of the wheel, the experiences I've had using it, and talk about the individual items that come within the main package when purchasing a SimSteering version 2 from Leo Bodnar. Now, before we get into any of the detail at the wheel, and forgive me those of you that already know about direct drive wheels, but I just want to talk about the difference between a direct drive wheel and a more commonly available commercial belt-driven wheel solution. When I bolted this on my rig, I was coming from a Fanatec Club Sport version 2. This is a very, very good wheel, is the Fanatec Club Sport. It's belt-driven, it's very high-end. You could argue it's probably at around the top sort of level for a more traditional belt-driven wheel solution. And that retails for quite a bit of money, so it's quite an expensive, quite a nice, quite a fancy steering wheel. And up to this point, I've always been exceptionally happy with the Fanatec V2. It's always felt really nice to me, it's given some good forces, a good smooth experience, and I've had no complaints. But for a long time, I've been curious about direct drive wheels themselves, and how people are ranting and raving in the sim racing community that these are the next big thing. And they've been the next big thing, to be perfectly honest with you now, for a few years. And they're becoming more and more gradually accepted within the community. And there's been more and more direct drive wheel adopters, especially with the OSW, so the open source wheel solutions that are out there from a massively increasing range of different manufacturers. But it's commonly believed the Leo Bodnar SimSteering wheel version 2 is the absolute top of the direct drive wheel range. And that got me thinking, let's see if we can get our hands on one of these and see if all the praise that it seems to be getting from the community is justified. Now, to save you watching the rest of the video, yes, yes, yes and yes again, it is massively justified. Hand on heart, hand up. I've got to say now, I am a bit of a fanboy. I've driven this wheel, in fact I've extended my time with it by a couple of weeks just because I don't want to get rid of it. It's been fabulous. It's been absolutely amazing. In the simplest layman terms possible, is capable of producing considerably more force than a belt-driven wheel. So the motor, the shaft goes straight into the motor. There's no belts and cogs and pulleys. It's a repurposed industrial motor, basically, and it's controlled by various different bits of bespoke software. The shaft goes straight into the motor, and that means it can give to you a more direct, a more insistent, and a more powerful direct drive, force feedback experience without suffering from hitting the force feedback coming to the wheel. It doesn't peak and go over the force feedback parameter and then you start losing detail. It's got so much headroom that you can ramp it up to have a really stiff wheel experience, but it doesn't lose any of the force feedback detail. So the low end stuff, the minor, the little forces that come from the software are all present and correct. The noise that's coming into it, it's all been broken up and presented to you through a force feedback in the wheel in such a way that belt driven wheels are just not capable of producing. So in theory, any direct drive wheel, doesn't matter who it's from, will be a step up and over and above the best of the best from the belt driven range. So already I knew before I plugged this in, I was going to have, theoretically, a better experience than I could have got in my belt driven Fanatec Club Sport V2. But what I want to know is it that much better than the competition? Now, the version we've got is the 52, so that's 16 Newton millimeters of force. The 53 and 54 are also available if you want a bit more power, and they come at, while I consult my notes, 26 Newton millimeters for the 54 and 20.5 for the 53. That is a phenomenal amount of power you can get from these force feedback wheels, and that's why they come with an emergency stop button. When I first started up testing this version 2 SimSteering, I had the force feedback set at 70% of its capacity, thinking that would be enough for me to give me a good experience, but still wouldn't be too powerful for me to spend more time hunking the wheel over than actually driving. Way too much. I found my sweet spot is 50 and below %, so I still got half the power on the smallest of the 3 motor ranges, and that half the power gives you a damn good workout. I would knock it down to 40%, 35% if doing a stint over 30 minutes in length, just because the physical wear and tear on you as a person is incredible. I mean, the equipment's rock solid. You can have that 100% and run it all day, and I guarantee it will be absolutely fine. It's more your muscle strength and the physical exertion that needs to go into driving the car dictates how strong you want to run the software. And while we're on the software, I'll talk about that for a few moments. So the SimSteering V2 from Leo Bodnar has its own inbuilt software suite. Unlike open source wheels, where you can buy things like some payware software such as Sim Commander or a range of other different pieces of software that can program and tune and tweak your wheel, the Leo Bodnar comes with its own, and it's very, very simplistic. There are a few minimal sliders on there where you can change the force of your wheel, where you can change other different parameters such as you've got gain damping and you've got calibrate. There's various different calibration options within the software, but only a few minimal sliders. In my time, I've driven this wheel in R Factor 2, Assetto Corsa Competizione. I've driven it in Race Room Racing Experience, Automobilista, Project Cars and Formula 1 2018. And broadly speaking, apart from degrees of rotation, I've found that is generically quite good for all the different sims. I've also spent time in iRacing as well, but only a very small amount of time in iRacing. And I found, in order for me to be able to produce this review and get a feeling of the software and get a feeling of the steering wheel, of course, as well, I've kept it fairly standard, and that's worked really, really sweetly for me. I do enjoy tweaks and sliders and making improvements and changes, but you can get down a little bit of a rabbit hole with that, I've found, and I wanted to spend less time faffing and more time actually driving. I dare say, if I owned this piece of kit and had it forever, I would spend more time tweaking individual file settings for different games and different cars, but that's not really any benefit to my understanding of the hardware for this review, so I've not done that so much here. And actually, that can be seen as a positive for those of you that want a more plug and play solution. You can find some very good standard settings and have an exceptionally good driving experience if that's the way you want to go. Those of you more technically minded that don't mind getting into multiple different screens of settings may find that the V2 SimSteering wheel from Leo Bodnar doesn't have, on the software side, much scope for you to be able to make any fundamental changes. I can't testify as to whether that's a good or a bad thing for those of you that like to tweak. In my opinion, it's a good thing. you don't have the options because you don't need the options. Why have 50 choices when in 4 can give you a sublime driving experience? But you may feel differently depending on what your preferences are in that sort of range. But it's all very simple, it's all very straightforward, and it's all very easy stuff to set up in terms of software. And in terms of hardware, it's all very straightforward as well. I've got an 80/20 aluminium rig from SimLabs, and on the wheel deck that I've got on my rig, this thing fits absolutely perfectly. Snug, straight into the deck, 4 screws, holds it rock solid. And then I've got a quick release wheel mechanism, and then my steering wheel and button plate plug straight into it, straight in a USB. In terms of the motor itself, you've got 2 silver connectors on the very back. These can be moved left and right, and you've got 2 considerably meaty cables, one for the force feedback, one for the direct motor itself. Screw into that and go into this, which is the control unit for the SimSteering V2 wheel. This control unit is what has the power, it has the cables that go into the wheel itself, and it also plugs by a USB into your PC. So in reality, you're using one USB port and that's it in your PC, and then another USB port for me in my configuration, because my button plate on my steering wheel is powered by USB. So it's very limited on what you need to use on your available ports and resources on your computer, which is great. Again, a very simple box, a very straightforward box. Everything's labelled up quite nice and easily. It's a relatively big unit, to be fair. It's quite an industrial looking control unit, but the cable length is significant that you've got. So if it's not convenient to have that particularly close to your sim racing rig, you've got some leeway to be able to put that a little bit further away, wherever realistically is convenient and right for you in your particular man cave setup. So again, the box, not a lot to say about it really. It's very neat, very simplistic, quite industrial looking, very straightforward, absolutely no problems. And then plug into that comes the little emergency stop button. That's an important thing that you don't get in normal sim steering wheels. Emergency stop button is a very important thing because of the significant forces that you're using in the direct drive steering wheel. I found it many a time. You get into a situation where you get into a slide, or you make contact, or you have a crash, the wheel can violently rip out of your hands. So you can very easily get yourself into a position where you break a finger if you're running it too high and you're not concentrating on what you're doing. So if in some games you can have your force feedback settings wrong and the wheel oscillates, I'm sure you've all experienced that in whatever steering wheel you've got an emergency stop button, you slam down on it and it kills the wheel instantly. And then you screw it back on again and the power comes back to the wheel and you can continue doing what you need to do. I've never had need for that in my time with this direct drive wheel, thankfully. But it's great to know you've got that safety net just in case. There have been times where I've mistakenly run the force feedback too high, and then I've lost the car, I've either spun it or I've made contact with somebody, hit the wall, and it's just like a real racing car. You take your hands off the wheel because it will quite happily rip your hands off the end of your arms, and I love that. I think that is absolutely fantastic. I love the power that this wheel gives you, but it gives you power without compromise. In some belt driven or more traditional wheels, if you rack the forces up to the top, it's a lot like audio. The force feedback telemetry that's going into the wheel, if you're turning other lesser wheels up high in terms of force, it'll clip, and anything that's above the clipping point, it just won't transfer into your wheel. But the headroom in this is massive, so you can turn the force right up and it's never going to get to a point where the force feedback from the sim is giving you more information than the wheel can cope with. So you can have, if you wish, a really heavy steering feel, but it's still picking up the fine detail, the oversteer, the understeer, where it lightens, where it's feeling the road surface, or you're going over different bumps, or you're going over different road surfaces, you're going off-road, you're on curbs, you're going from tarmac to concrete, whatever. It can pick big and small forces up and multiply them enough so you can actually feel them in a genuine and clear and natural and organic way. So well, it blew my mind. Absolutely. I mean, all direct drive wheels are good, but this, for me, is a class above anything I've ever driven. And I've driven quite a bit in direct drive steering wheel land. Yeah, I've been mesmerised by it. And that nicely, I suppose, moves us on to the feeling of the wheel. It's incredibly smooth. Now, the force is obviously, for anybody who tries direct drive wheel, the first thing you will notice is the amount of force. And we've already talked about that, the force that you can get from the wheel itself. But the second thing, once you've got used to that and the giddiness has gone away and you've calmed down a little bit, it's the smoothness of the wheel. There is categorically and absolutely no cogging on this wheel whatsoever. It is smooth as a knife through warm butter. It's beautiful at any time, under any situation, in any circumstances. Normal driving, smooth driving, giving it some, being leery, being stupid with it, going off-road. It's been faultless and smooth and crisp and natural and organic all the way through. And that's something that puts it over and above other direct drive wheels that I've ever driven, is just the sheer amount of smoothness. It's got a great resolution, so it's already picking up the fine little detail anyway, but the way it does it through the motor that Leo Bodnar used, it's just, for me, a step above what I've felt before in other sim steering wheels, in other direct drive sim steering wheels as well, for that matter. It really is quite spectacular, and I've been really impressed by that. My default go-to combination, so to speak, for road testing steering wheels would have to be SimSteering in R-Factor 2. SimSteering is laser scanned in R-Factor 2, and it's particularly well done. In fact, I've already gone on record to say on video, for me, the R-Factor 2 Studio 397 SimSteering is the finest track in sim racing, bar none. And it's also a really good track to test force feedback steering wheels, because there's so many different surface types, there's different levels, there's different kinds of surface joining the same bit of track. It's bumpy, it's quite a gritty, it's quite an unkept circuit. So it's perfect to really feel what this wheel feels like. And it blew me away. I can feel when I'm going over different types of terrain. So there's a little bit where it's asphalt, then it goes on a concrete. You can feel that transition as you drive over the seam. I can feel every bump. I can feel bumps that I could not feel in my Fanatec Club Sport version 2. It brings out the life of the circuit in a way that I was not expecting. It really blew my mind. It was a fantastic road test to try this on. I used, if you're curious, the GT3 cars in R-Factor 2, the fairly recent GT3 cars, and the force feedback brought that sim alive. I'm a big R-Factor 2 fan, I make no bones about that, and I think the force feedback is fantastic in RF2, but this moved it up 110% again, and that's just using the SimSteering default profile that Marcel Offerman's created for the sim. So it's not even going into the software itself and tweaking it yet further. What I got out of the box was the best thing I've ever done in sim racing, frankly. Just blew me away. Absolutely mind-blowing. As I say, you can feel what the car's doing to another level. Now, when I'm sim racing, I will admit, this sounds strange for somebody who likes the racing, but going fastest does not interest me. I don't buy a piece of sim racing equipment to give me lap time. It's immersion that I'm interested in. I wanted to be a real racing driver. It didn't pan out for various reasons, so I'm doing the next best thing. And what I want to achieve from my sim racing setup and from the software I use is the most realistic experience I can possibly get in the amount of technology that's available today and the money I've got to spend. Will this steering wheel make me faster? I actually think it would. I can feel more, I know more what's happening with the car, I can be more consistent, I can drive the same lines and the same techniques because it's consistent in what it's telling me. And that's great, but I don't care about that. Does it make the experience more realistic? Do I feel closer to driving a real car using the Leo Bodnar SimSteering version 2? Absolutely, categorically, that's a yes. It lifted my immersion experience up and above anything I've ever done before, including other direct drive steering wheels from different manufacturers and different solutions. Mind-blowing is the only way I can put. I sound like a fanboy, and I really am. Mind-blowing how much better my experience was after that. Just phenomenal. As I say, you can feel the car in ways I've never been able to feel before. You can feel the track, you can feel what the track's telling you, the detail, the textures, the stones, the bumps, the curves, the different surface types in a way that I've never ever had before. In such a smooth way as well, and so crisp. This is difficult to describe in words. It really is. It's impossible, in fact, I think. But it's clean, the feeling you get. Sometimes in other direct drive wheels or other belt-driven wheels, it feels a little bit like some of it's canned or a little bit artificial. I don't know if that makes sense. It feels a little bit like the wheel's interpreting what it's been told and then feeding that to you. Where this, and I don't know whether it's placebo or whether I'm talking absolute codswallop, but for me, it felt cleaner and crisper and more mechanical. It felt like I would joined to a steering shaft that were then joined to wheels and a chassis and a car in a way that I've never had before. It's just unbelievable, just absolutely unbelievable. I've really loved it. I think the feeling it's given me in all the sims, as I say, I've driven it in pretty much every sim that's out there. I think the biggest difference was in R Factor 2. Incredibly impressive in Assetto Corsa Competizione as well. Really lifted that sim up into being a very enjoyable driving experience. But I will temper that by saying a force feedback update came out while I ran the SimSteering steering wheel. So I've not tried the game Assetto Corsa Competizione with a different wheel post-update. So some of that could be software, some of it could be wheel. But I know when I first picked that game up and plugged this in and ran it, it was a big improvement over what I've had before. And it's also really good in Assetto Corsa, and with a few tweaks, of which I will link in this video, those tweaks. Automobilista as well, stunning, absolutely stunning. I will say it didn't make a massive difference in Project Cars 2. I am not a Project Cars 2 fan, if I'm honest with you. I think the potential's there, but it's dubious for me on the physics and the force feedback side of things in general terms. I stuck with the Ginetta Ginetta Junior, sorry, which is one of the better cars in the sim. And it felt better, absolutely, but the game is pretty vague in the force feedback department for me. So it was better, but it still felt a little bit numb compared to the other titles. Still, it improved things, like we Formula 1 2018 as well. Again, it gave me a heavier steering feel, and I could feel a little bit more of the smaller detail than I could previously. But I think fundamentally, no matter how good the wheel is, it's always limited by the software. And I think Assetto Corsa Competizione, R Factor 2 in particular, AMS as well, and Race Room Racing Experience, really the performance was lifted massively in those sims, but a little bit less so in Project Cars 2 and in Formula 1 2018. I firmly, if I'm honest with you, put that down to the games and not the wheel, but it was across the board an improvement in all of the sims. A massive, no, let's not underplay this, Paul, a massive improvement in all of the sims. So if immersion's your thing, I don't know what to say. Go for it. It's brilliant. I can't fault it. And it's 100 times better than the best belt driven wheel. And for me, quite a bit better than the next best direct drive wheel that I've driven at least. I've not spent any time in an Accu-Force steering wheel apart from at various different conventions, so I can't really judge it on that, but I have done 1 or 2 different OSW manufacturers, and it's much better than that for me, I've got to admit. A lot of that's down to the motor, a lot of that's down to the clever trickery in the software as well, and the electronics, which obviously Leo Bodnar, they are electronics people. The electronics that sit in this box make a massive difference. It's a really good wheel. And that moves me on to the pros and cons of the Leo Bodnar SimSteering version 2 steering wheel. We'll talk about the pros first and foremost. It's not particularly big, so it's got a small footprint. The motor is, the 52 that I'm running, is significantly smaller than other direct drive steering wheels on the market. So the motor is not huge despite the massive punch that it packs, and that can be useful for some people depending on what their rig setup solution is. Another pro, resolution, very high. The feeling, the smoothness, the clarity of the force feedback that I get back is exceptional. It's really good. There's absolutely no cogging whatsoever. And what I mean by that is, when you turn in the steering wheel, you can feel where it clicks round to each little point. In this, you cannot feel that. It is smooth, clear and crisp at all times, in all conditions, including extreme conditions. Another positive, power. You can ramp it up more than I'm not the strongest bloke in the world. You can ramp it up way more than I can cope with comfortably and still have headroom to spare in terms of clipping for force feedback. So if you want a powerful steering wheel that gives you a real workout, even at 52, which is the smallest motor in the range, perfect for you. Other bonuses, it's quite a neat and clean and compact looking setup. So as I say, I've already said it's quite a small footprint. It's a very neat and very crisp looking solution. The cables that it joins up are all very sturdy and very solid and very nice looking. The connectors are high quality. All the cabling and everything is very high quality, very good, nice, fine, detailed stuff. It's a fantastic experience when you get out in sim. I've already talked about that, so I'm not going to go to town on it in this summary, but it's a really strong contender for giving a massive amount of immersion, for improving your consistency and your speed and your enjoyment as a sim racing driver. Big positive, cannot say enough about that. Other positives, it's very quiet. So unlike Fanatec SimSteering, that's Fanatec version 2 that I had, which has got fans inbuilt to keep the motor cool, and you can often hear this, silent, quiet as a mouse, makes no noise whatsoever. And that's really nice if you're racing and you're racing through speakers. There's no interfering noise that breaks the immersion for you. Absolutely silent, really nice. Other positives, the software, very simple but massively powerful, really effective. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I set some standard settings and they set to work superbly with some in-sim tweaks. Really good. So overall, the positives are huge, fantastic. And now I'll talk about the cons. And these are all, to be honest with you, not particularly the fault of the software or the hardware. So these are cons, but I had to scratch my head to think of some. The biggest one, the most obvious one, is price. The SimSteering version 2 wheel is very expensive. It is markedly more expensive than a lot of direct drive solutions out on the market. You can be dropping 3,000 GBP plus for one of these setups, and for that doesn't come with a wheel or a button plate, so there's no gears, no steering wheel. It's just the box, this emergency stop button, the motor itself, and the cables you need to run said steering wheel. That's a lot of money. It's worth it, in my opinion. I've not got £3 plus, so I can't buy it, but it's worth it if you've got the money. But that is a significant barrier to entry for a lot of people, and I can appreciate that, myself included. So that's a fairly significant con, but at the same time, if money didn't matter in the world, wouldn't that be nice? The pros make it why it's worth £3. You get what you pay for, people. 99% of the time. This is expensive, but for a good reason, because it's fantastic. Second con I've already talked about is it doesn't come with a steering wheel in that price. So I had to buy a quick release and a rim and a button plate behind it to run this steering wheel. That's often the case in a lot of other direct drive wheel setups, but the entry point price is much lower. So that's, again, you're paying 3,000 plus, and then you need to add quite a bit more money on top of that to get a good wheel rim and button plate if you want the flappy paddles. So that's a bit of a pity as well, but again, it's down to, do you think the price is worth what you're getting out of the box? Other cons, again, this is personal preference, it's not really a con as such. I think the little box of magic tricks, the electronics, a little bit industrial and quite large in size. I don't really think visually, I don't particularly like the look of that. I've got a Granite Devices OSW electronics box for the wheel that's on my rig at the moment, and that's a lot funkier and a lot snazzier and a lot more modern looking. Not really a con, scraping barrel, trying to think of things to keep this an evenly and fair weighted review, but yeah, I do think that's a little bit industrial looking for me, and if I'm spending that kind of money, I want something a little bit snappy, something that a little bit that shines a light on itself and says, look, I am expensive, I am cool, look at me, aren't I cool? And that's not the case with this particularly, but again, really not a significant con. And final one, and to be honest with you, this is a con that I will put on every single direct drive wheel that I drive, because it's nothing to do with Leo Bodnar or the SimSteering2, is compatibility. It's still, despite having been out this technology for a while, a reasonably emerging product, so it's not fully supported with all racing sims. I've raced all the big hitters on this one and it's been absolutely fine, but there are still games like Dakar 18, for example, who forgot that steering wheels are a thing, so direct drive wheels aren't supported in that. But again, that's scraping the barrel, that's not Leo Bodnar or the SimSteering2's fault. And other than that, there really isn't any. I admit I am prone to enthusiasm in sim racing, I get that totally. I try and remain fair and balanced, but I am enthusiastic. But don't let that fool you in this review. This is not coming from my desire to be positive, not at all. This is absolutely fabulous. I'm finding it very difficult not to explain how good it is without swearing. It really is exceptional. I've had some big breakthroughs that I've driven while racing in sims. I started off, when you're talking software, you have the basic simulators through to the fabulous stuff we've got today. I started my sim racing with a Logitech G25 on a skip fine desk and an office chair, wedging it in against the wall to stop moving about. And I've moved on to a really good rig with really good hardware, exceptional sims, VR, direct drive wheels, expensive pedals, and out of everything, this has been the best thing I've ever driven in sim racing. Okay, I've driven £50,000 motion rigs, they're the best thing ever, but in terms of realistic, this is the biggest thing I've ever done. If I were better at negotiating, I would have encouraged my wife to allow me to spend some money and keep this, but that didn't work. It really is that good. It's the king of sim racing hardware, in my personal opinion. There's a lot of noise in the community about how good these are. Every word's justified. I have absolutely adored this piece of equipment. When I box it up and ship it off tomorrow, there will be a tear in my eye. It is 10 out of 10. It's a bit pricey. No, it's a lot pricey. And that spoils things. That's a shame, but it's worth every penny, every pound, every dollar, whatever the currency is, every euro, whatever your currency, it's worth it. Really is. It's been phenomenal. If you've got that kind of money to spend and you're happy to spend that kind of money, I wouldn't hesitate to recommend this to you. I have loved it. And that's really it. That's all I can say about that. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'd appreciate a like and a follow and a subscribe on our Twitch and YouTube channel. You can catch the latest news at RaceDepartment.com. We cover real and virtual motorsports. There'll be a lot more of this kind of thing coming up as the year progresses and into the future. And obviously as well, follow us if you don't mind on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. So I've been Paul Jeffrey. This has been RDTV. And we've been talking about one of the most exceptional things I've ever seen. The Leo Bodnar SimSteering version 2 direct drive steering wheel. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Until next time, sim racing's awesome. Catch you later.